So today we're going to be focusing on Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, and it's about the Pharisees being critical of Jesus and Jesus' disciples in regards to the Sabbath. So to get us thinking, what is, if you imagine a day, Connor, that it's a very filling day, a relaxing day, a comforting day, however you'd frame that, what would your ideal day be?
Sure. So I really love this question, and I think I'm just really excited to talk about this whole episode because I think it just brings up, man, a couple of things that I'm super passionate about: legalism and the Sabbath. And so for me, I actually try to practice taking a Sabbath every single week. I think it's a really important part of just my maturity and my growth in Christ. And so my ideal Sabbath is I get off work on a Friday around 9 or 10 o'clock. I come home, I shower, I wash all the grime, both emotionally and physically off myself from the week. Not that I don't shower earlier in the week, but you know what I mean. Maybe I'm a little bit more thorough. That might be too much information. Anyways, I there's some things I pray through. There's some things that I talk through with God. I always have a certain set of worship songs I listen to on the way home, and then that kind of starts off my Sabbath. And so usually on the Friday after I get off work about 10 o'clock to Saturday around 10 o'clock is kind of what I consider my Sabbath. And so I'll have that kind of contemplative prayer to set up my day, to set up my expectations for it. Almost always my Sabbath will include some sort of special meal that my wife and I cook together, some sort of hey, we're going to go a little bit extra for this. We're going to really enjoy the goodness of what food can be. And because it's my wife, it's usually healthier than if I was just making it, which is ultimately good and honoring to God as well. And so, eating good food is a part of it. My ideal Sabbath usually involves reading. I like reading a specific book, taking time to really dive into something. Also, during the summer, sometimes my wife and I would like to go hammock during these times during our Sabbath day. And that's also a great opportunity to do that. Also included on my Sabbath is, I getting to spend special time with my wife. I think that's a vital, in fact, historical part of the Sabbath. That's a way that the Jewish people have celebrated that day for, basically since the beginning of time. And so I go to sleep. I sleep in as late as I want on Saturday morning, and then I usually have banana pancakes with my wife, and that's kind of the end of it. So it's not the perfect day, but it is the ideal rest and relaxing and who God is and his beautiful creation.
That is really impressive to me. Really impressive. I am the before picture of your after. You're the after picture of success relative. Yeah, I can honestly say, and I didn't even see this coming until we just started talking about it, but I don't take regular Sabbath at all. When we first started talking about this, my thought was, well, I'll make sure everything's done for the week. That my work is never done. There's always something more to do, but I've covered everything. I will relax, but mostly I'm either talking with people, and that's a part of Sabbath for me, because that's not. If people are coming to me and they're only talking about, hey, I have this problem, can you help me solve this problem? That's not restful to me. But sitting, this right here in many ways is Sabbath feeling to me. It's renewing within itself. But honestly, I usually am not that intentional with the time, and so it gets filled in with clutter. Just frankly. And so I would have to give this even a legitimate answer, I'd have to say, okay, in those times I think, man, I feel the pressure of, call it burnout, or I just feel this building, and I'd have to reference that. But sadly, it's not regular. I'm even convicted in your telling, I'm yeah, I could do that. I have negotiable time, I could do that. I just am never intentional about it. So this is certainly one of those areas where I'm man, I see you responding to God in a way that I do not respond to God. And I usually only move there as a result of, man, either I've got a big decision looming, and I usually have to get away. I'm not a nature person, but I do need to get outside. and focus, and then I'll do a lot of contemplative prayer and just
Sure.
reflection, that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm really challenged by this, honestly.
Well, that's really honoring. This is something that I've only really picked up in the past year or so, and I would just say, and if anybody feels like I'm the after picture, I get the ideal Sabbath. I don't know, once a month maybe, if that. There's always something that comes up. There's always some emergency, or there's always, or I just really want to spend the day scrolling on my phone, and that's deeply unhealthy, and so I kind of ruin my Sabbath that way. And so that's kind of my ideal that I strive after. It's the abstaining from the creative work and just resting and who God has made me to be. And so hopefully we'll get to unpack that a little bit more in the episode. So hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you are listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast.
So as I said earlier, we're going to be reading from Luke chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Just want to remind you, and if you're a longtime listener, then you know this, but I just want to remind you, the whole purpose of what we're doing is we've had life experience, we've had studies, and certainly Connor's already indicated a passion for some of these concepts, but this is not, we studied it for hours, and now here are our conclusions. This is us practicing being amazed and perplexed by God's word. And listening for God right now. His word is always living and active and always wanting to teach us. And so for you as the listener, I'd encourage you, just whether you're driving around, exercising, sitting around, whatever your context is, create a little space in your heart and just ask God, not so much to speak to you through us, although that's great too, but just that he would speak to you in any way, including the reading of this passage. It says, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands, and eat the kernels. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said to them, 'The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.'" So as you take that in, the living and active Word of God, what is speaking to you? What amazes you about this?
Well, one, there was kind of a thing that I'd never really contemplated before. There's so many times where I see things in the text, somebody acting a particular way or doing something, and I see myself in them. More and more lately, there's just been this big cultural divide that comes up, and there's just kind of the silly, funny thing of imagining myself, I'm going to follow, I get transported back 2,000 years ago, I'm going to follow Jesus, and then what that actually looks like is, grazing in a field and eating grains, and that was a pretty common practice, but something like that is always amazing to me, but kind of more, I guess, deeper than that. I guess you can be the judge if it's deeper. What I love about this, what's happening around this basically is that the Pharisees have taken a good, right, and true practice, the Sabbath, and they've corrupted it and they turn it around, and they have they have made their own way how to do it. They've added to the Word of God. They've taken the Sabbath and they said, yeah, the Sabbath is good, but here's a lot of extra rules you have to follow to really be in line with God. Here's what you really have to do. And so what would end up happening practically is that these people would end up basically worshiping the Sabbath. They had a list of rules they had to keep. They had to do things in an exact specific way. And it became this practice. It would almost become more cumbersome than it would become life-giving. And that's what the Sabbath is for. It's meant to give life. It's meant to be part of the rhythm of our existence. God, when he creates the world, he establishes the work and the rest pattern in Genesis 1. And that reality, that fabric is woven into all of existence. And so when we corrupt that, when we become workaholics or when we become lazy, we're corrupting the very essence of what God has woven into the reality of our existence. And so for the Pharisees, they're taking something good and right, and they're corrupting it, and they're altering how these people are experiencing life. And it's this terrible, sad thing. And these Israelites, they begin to worship the Sabbath as as the destination. And when Jesus comes in and says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, it's just this fantastic reminder for me that of all the walls we build up, all the systems we try to create, the end goal is to worship Jesus, is to be in line with Jesus, is to experience God and experience his goodness and his flourishing life that he wants to give us. And so for me, man, it's so incredible. Every time I come to a passage like this, that just reminds me of the reality that God is in control, and that all these systems and all these ways of doing things that sometimes I can see as cumbersome, or I can see them as weighty or too heavy on me, God wants to strip all those back, and at the bottom of them is he just wants to be closer to us, and that's pretty incredible to me.
That is. I will tell you, this is my day of learning, certainly, and it's always learning, but that I'm always encouraged with your holistic approach. And I realize I was raised the opposite. I was raised on, and there's good words for this that I don't have, but I was raised on what's this verse mean? Not even in context. It's just like you take it as topical. And even you tying that all together, and I believe this in general, my sin, the issue with my sin is not that God's mad at me now. Oh, I sinned. What's your punishment? What's fair? That's not the issue. The issue is my sin is I'm leaving alignment with God. God has a way that I would thrive and have abundant life in him, and I would impact the kingdom with like every move I make. And my sin is I'm not aligned with him, and so it's diminishing. Now, because of God's amazing wisdom, he can take whatever I do and make it beautiful in its time, even my deep failures. But there is a way that he designed us to work with him that we're always bucking against. You know what I mean? And that's missing the mark. That's sin. And then you have these specific manifestations of sin that we identify as, oh, you sinned, not that you were angry, but in your expression of anger, or you stole, or these kind of things, And so, but this idea of considering it is me missing the mark when I'm not more intentional about resting. It's funny, all these resting apps, fall to sleep listening to this, and those wouldn't exist clearly if we have a whole nation of people that aren't getting enough sleep. Now, that's physical sleep. And we understand that to get good physical sleep, maybe you can even medicate yourself, but even if I'm medicating myself, which I do at times, I don't mean to disparage that, I have much better sleep if I'm at peace. And the way I find peace is not solving the problems. The way I find peace is resting in God being the Lord of it. And so this is amazing to me in a whole different way after hearing you unpack it. I'm like, yeah, this is a holistic approach. And Jesus always is. But I sometimes will water it down to, okay, what's the doctrine here? And there is doctrine. Doctrine meaning here's the way you should do this, But the real key is he is always bringing us back to our ultimate spiritual health. And when you hear that, you might hear selfish. No. I'm talking our ultimate alignment with God. He's saying, Pharisees, you don't understand what, or you do, and you're intentionally corrupting it. But either way, it's being corrupted. You don't understand. This was meant to connect you with God and cause you to be at peace, which then will cause you to get better sleep, and it will cause you to make better decisions, and this cascading effect of God's glory in your life, which we limit by not just saying, and this is the Pharisees' problem, they're like, it's not enough for him to say, rest on the Sabbath. We need to make sure we qualify. What qualifies for rest?
Yes. And see, for me, like we talked earlier about in kind of the opening of the show, I kind of have the rhythm for how I want to practice my Sabbath. If I'm not really careful and I'm not constantly checking myself, that can become the be all end all. That can become the Sabbath itself. That can be what I'm after. And I have to really check myself if something interrupts me, or somebody calls me because they need my help with something, or whatever happens to interrupt that. There's this initial oh, how dare you? This is my time. This is my moment to reconnect with God. And I had these plans of how I was going to do X, Y, and Z. And so for me, this is where the story becomes really helpful, is I have to constantly be checking myself of, okay, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Like, we're recording Thursday. Why am I going to do the things I'm going to do tomorrow? Is it because I really like to hammock, or is it because I really like to read? or are and those things are all true and they're good and they're right, or is the overarching theme of why I'm doing them is because they bring me closer to God and they give me a better picture of his goodness, of his kindness, of his creativity. And I think that that's true of all time, but I think it's really good that we're focusing now on specifically when we rest. And so that just kind of leads me to a natural next question. I really struggle with rest versus distraction, right? I really struggle with, okay, I've done all my work for the day. I've gotten home. All the chores are done. And man, there's just so much stuff going on. There's politics, there's sports. And you know what? I'm just going to unplug and watch Netflix for, 2 to 3 hours. And that's fine. That's good. But I think for me, I really struggle with differentiating that time, like my video game time or my Netflix time versus actually resting. And so I'm sure that this is something that I would be interested in kind of hearing your perspective on. Do you have any experience or any sort of mental checks that you do to find the difference or to be able to use both? I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So here's the challenge we always face when we talk about any spiritual practice. I think our human, maybe especially our American, but in general, our minds go to performance.
Mm-hmm.
How do I do it well? Will I do it well? Did I do it well? And then we can find our identity in the doing it well. That's not, and we said this before, but it goes back to let's do a all-night prayer. Jesus didn't do an all-night prayer. Jesus went out and prayed, and he kept praying, and then suddenly it had been all night. Like he didn't do it as a spiritual discipline in the sense that this was disconnected. Jesus had an ongoing conversation with God that he called his life. And that's what God is calling us to. So there's a way that you could theoretically watch Netflix. Now, this is the thing. What content are you watching? But there's a way that you could watch Netflix that it was more than just a distraction, And it's not just if it's Christian programming. I mean, it could be any number of things if you're in the right frame of mind. Now,
as long as you have one of those old DVD players that took out the curse words.
Video Angel, yeah.
Well, that's the newer version.
Right.
But I had friends that had the cool DVD that I don't know how it did this, but when it sensed that something was coming up that was bad, it would change the word.
Oh wow.
Yeah. No, it was...
Anyway, So the key here is we tend to think if I can just get the circumstances right, then I'll be able to really connect with God. And God's saying, and I'm not suggesting, people advocate, get a closet, get a time, do all these, and those are good things. They're not bad things. But what I found is for the majority of humanity that want to walk with God, something happens where that can't be consistent, and they're either abusing themselves, accusing themselves of, I'm just no good at this, or they make it their God.
Yeah.
And so I'm all for, we do not need to deny positions of the body makes a difference. If I'm on my knees, I think differently than if I'm sitting in a chair and these kind of things. So I'm not saying that's not important. The key though, the thing that must be there is, are you having an honest conversation with God? God, I just watched Netflix for whatever time, and how's that affect me? I just read the Bible for 2 hours. How's that affect me? I just prayed. I just slept. I took a good nap. How's it affect me? And you're asking God to show you. See, the challenge is we think that either we have to have a good strategy or at the very least we need to be able to have a good analysis. How many things have you done in your life that you didn't see it benefited you till 10 years later?
I think about, so some of the best memories I have with my two older brothers are us at 2 a.m. watching bad horror movies, watching poorly made ones, and just laughing together and talking over the movie and just being in hysterics because it was ridiculous and it was 2 a.m. And I had fun during those times, but I look back now, which would have been probably 8 or 9 years ago. And man, those are some of when I think about my brothers and I think about the good times, there are times I go back when I'm really little, but in my more adult conscious life, those are those memories I really cherish, and that they bond me to those guys. And I think there can be the same sort of thing where with God, where you can have a particular practice that if you have the correct mindset of I'm going to watch this movie with my family, and it's going to draw us together, and it's going to be a common experience, that it can be something that if you don't have the proper mindset, it can just be a fun distraction and it was good, wholesome stuff, or it can be something that you get to see part of God with.
Yeah, no, I just think what's really important is we have to own the fact that we don't know what brings us life. We have a sense, but since God's always working with us and changing us, that alone should send a signal. I need to keep talking to God about this. So the way you read the Bible, if that's the way you've always read the Bible and you're getting life from that, that's awesome. But if you read the Bible and you're like, man, there's no life there, then try something different. Try another way to connect. But the key here isn't the adopting of the appropriate technique. The key is talking to God honestly about it. And I think what happens is you're like, well, I'm not good at reading the Bible, or I'm not good at prayer, or I'm not good at this, or we're constantly saying, I need to do this more, I need to do this more. Stop saying that and talk to God about it.
Yeah.
And which is weird because you're like, so you're proposing that I talk to God and say, I really stink at prayer, and I'm not even interested in praying to you. And you're praying while you're saying that to God. And this is the thing. We still struggle, I think most Christians still struggle with this idea that God gave us his word. Now it's up to us to just practice it all. And the challenge is that's not what Jesus did. Jesus says, I don't do anything except what God tells me in real time. And it's not to say he wasn't referencing something he learned 5 or 10 years ago, but it is saying this was a constant conversation he was having with God. And this applies to everything, but specifically with rest. If you get to the end of your day and you're like, I feel totally dissatisfied, start talking to God about that. Don't even think of it as prayer. Mm-hmm. Think of it as, a lot of time, and motivation really matters. A lot of times people say, I didn't get anything out of counseling. And if I'm able to talk honestly with them, if they feel free, and I'll say to them, what did you bring? Well, I didn't tell my counselor this, and I never shared that because that would be embarrassing. And I'm like, and I never really invested, and I never did anything they told me to do outside of the sessions. And I want to say, you didn't experience counseling.
Yeah.
You paid a bunch of money or to tell somebody only these few things, so they couldn't help you. And I think it's even worse with God, where we feel like, I really feel angry with God, but I couldn't tell God that. I really feel judgmental about myself because this is the first time I prayed in 10 years. And God's like, let's start right now then.
Yeah, that's the thing that happens. Like, I'm not good at prayer, and I don't even know where I'd start. I mean, you start right there. And I think the same thing is true for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is actually... It's part of one of the 10 Commandments. It's always funny because you look at like a secular society. Most people are going to agree with most of the 10 Commandments. Most people are going to agree that you shouldn't, kill people. It's probably not good to, commit adultery. It's good not to steal. Like most of the things are pretty good. But then you get to this weird one of keeping the Sabbath. And I think that a lot of secular people and a lot of Christian people will read that and just completely glaze over it. If I came to you, Jason, and I was like, I'm having a really hard problem not stealing, and I don't know where to, how do I stop stealing? Like, where do I start? Or I'm having a hard time gossiping it, and I really struggle with it. I think one of the first things you would say, well, stop doing it right now. And I would say the same thing to somebody who's saying, well, I don't have a full day, Connor. I don't have a full day to do a Sabbath. And I've been at seasons in my life where that's the case, and I'm sure I'll enter into seasons where that's the case. Although I want to make it a priority to always have the possibility of doing that. But when I was working for a church, most people will consider their Sabbath on a Sunday. Sundays were the most exhausting days for me. Mm-hmm. There was no way that was going to be a Sabbath for me because it was working. It wasn't resting. And so I would just encourage you, if this is not a practice that you have ever really considered doing or tried, and when you hear this, you're like, well, I've got X, Y, and Z I've got to do. And when is the time going to be? I work an odd schedule. My kids are X, Y, and Z old. They've got this going on. I'll just find an hour. Find an hour sometime the next week after you listen to this to just take an hour and rest and breathe and be okay where you are, who you are, because God is who he is. And so, and then you can work on expanding it, and then you can work on trying different things and moving about. But I would just encourage you, in the same way that you become a better prayer by just starting and praying more and talking to God and being open and honest, part of the way you become a better rester. And we talk about becoming better workers, but we very rarely talk about becoming better resters. Part of the way you become a better rester is by starting. So yeah, that would be my encouragement.
One thing that just popped in my head is there are some of you listeners that may be saying, wait a minute, we're not Jewish. Yeah, it's in the Ten Commandments.
Jesus was.
Yeah, well, Jesus was. Yeah, that's true. But in Hebrews, it talks about, it establishes, hey, here's what the Sabbath was. This is in Hebrews 4. You can check this out. Here's what the Sabbath was. But now every day, that is today, which means every day, is your Sabbath. Mm-hmm. And so what we're advocating is, man, if you can find a day, there's something about that is really healing and energizing, especially if you can do it on a regular basis. But what Connor's is saying here, and maybe you need to think, man, I'd be lucky to rest for 5 minutes. Okay, rest for 5 minutes. Don't perform rest. Just rest. And talk to God. And people are like, well, when I pray, I start thinking about what I'm going to eat at Wendy's. I'm like, okay, then pray about what you're going to eat at Wendy's. I mean, just keep turning it over like a conversation where, and some of us don't talk at all, and some of us talk all the time. As a person that speaks stream of consciousness, I found it so unhelpful to say, stop thinking that and stop thinking this. But rather, and this is just what works for me, praying about, God, clearly I'm very concerned about what I'm going to eat today. I trust you to bring me that. And what happens is I'm relieved of that thought, at least for a while. And so I think just that idea of and resting isn't prayer, but oftentimes the way we stay in a restful state is we keep talking to God.
And we can't be good. We can't be good prayers. We can't be good followers of Jesus if we're not resting.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things that if I was chronically lazy, which certainly at times I've struggled with, there'd be people in my life who would come to me. And if I was really failing and I was not providing and I was not showing up to work, there'd people who would come to me and say, that's a problem, Connor. You're not honoring the way God has created you to be, and you're not honoring the people around you. I mean, I would say the same person who's a workaholic, if you're not finding time to truly rest, you are robbing yourself and you're robbing your family and you're ultimately robbing God. And so, are you commanded to take a full day Sabbath? No, you're not commanded to do it, but you're also not commanded to eat. You're not commanded to drink. Resting is as natural to us as those things. God wove it into you in the womb. The rhythm of working and resting is as natural as it can be. And so do you have to do it? No, you don't. You get to. And I would just encourage you that as you begin to practice this art, practice the art of resting and stopping, God will bless you in wholly new and cool ways. And you don't do it for the whole and cool new ways, but I'm just promising you, man, just take a breath and rest if this is something that you haven't ever done. So, Jason.
Yes.
Turning on, what perplexes you about this passage?
So, this dynamic of as Jesus is interacting with them, and he is, the dynamic that I guess really gets to me is seeing Jesus's status. Maybe is the word I'm looking for. You'd mentioned that these men are taking the grain, they're going through this grain field that they didn't plant. And so they're taking these heads of grain. We already covered the parable of the shrewd manager. Like, what is this, a theft passage? Is there something said? And what it is, this is an indication of their poverty. Like the Old Testament, the Jewish laws were, you have to leave a certain amount of your land, of your grain fields, not you don't reap it because you leave that for the poor. So here's this thing. Jesus has no power in their society. He has no credentials, not normal forms of power. He has no credentials. He's not aligned with a certain rabbi that would distinguish him. He has no money, which this is something. Thinking Jesus, it's an interesting lens to look at. Jesus is the intentionally poorest guy in the room. And I'm not saying if you're poor, you're more honorable, but I am saying that's an interesting lens to look through, is that Jesus says repetitively, I basically depend on the kindness of strangers in our vernacular, but he's depending on God fully. And so here he is walking through. So you have this demonstration of, if we're to see it through Jewish eyes and they're saying, yeah, Jesus' followers were eating this grain field, I don't think it's presented as a snack. I think it's like, oh, they're the poor in this story, you know what I mean? And which would usually say the powerless. And it's interesting that the Pharisees do not ask, well, no, they're asking him. They're asking him. And he refers to David at his poorest place. David, when he eats this showbread, he's on the run from Saul, meaning he has not only nothing, but now he's about to be persecuted for an extended time, eventually going to go up to their enemies to find some comfort. And so it's in these desperate spots. Jesus was in this desperate spot. Now, here's the perplexing part for me. The perplexing part is when I feel that way, I feel I have nothing to offer. And here he's saying he's Lord of the whole deal, which that's an interesting phrase, and I don't know, maybe we can dig into that. But it's this fascinating thing that I don't know how, when I'm in situations and feel like I have no power here, I do my best work by not exploding on people. That's what I think. Don't explode. Because when I feel helpless, I feel like I got to push back. I got to assert myself. I got to find some power. And I don't think about it as power in the traditional sense, but it's just that idea. I need to find my place here. Or I withdraw. And Jesus doesn't just withdraw. He owns this.
Yes.
And I'm not the Lord of the Sabbath. He is, but I'm part of the Lord of the Sabbath's work. So that's a perplexing thing to figure out. How do I move from feeling totally powerless to not letting that situation control me?
That's really good. I had not even approached it from where you came from. In my mind, I'm immediately going to the Sermon on the Mount, and I'm like, why is it the same way for me? Why do I struggle? Why is my instinct to grab power, to gain more power in a situation, to control something? And I think it's because sometimes I don't believe blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the... I think you were just saying that, and I think it's very convicting for me. I think why I struggle with it is I don't truly believe that. I don't believe the humble are honored, and I don't believe the poor are honored in the way that I like to think that they are. And so that's really convicting. Another thing that you said that really blew up in my mind, it sent fireworks throughout my brain, and there's plenty of room in there. There's very little brain. So it's just, there are fireworks going off constantly, is Jesus is the least powerful person in the room, quote unquote. They're out in the field, but he's the least powerful person in the room. And the Pharisees come and they give him power. Like the Pharisees are trying to trap him, are trying to take away power that he is not taking for himself. And by doing that, by confronting him, by giving him a chance to talk to for people to hear him, they're actually doing the exact opposite of what they're doing. And I just love, there's so many things that I love that Jesus does. And when Jesus turns things on their head, and when he subverts negative actions of people against them, I just love that so much. And I had not even connected that until you said that basically the Pharisees, while trying to bring Jesus down, give him more power.
That is fascinating. And that's a message for me. I'm like, if I can relax in God, which is, as we said, Jesus having this ongoing, restful conversation with God that showed him, and the Spirit's working to show him what to do, what to say, that if I would just rest, God would bring me in. And this happens to me. I have found myself in positions where I had no power, and all of a sudden, I'm not this same dynamic, but all of a sudden I find myself in a place of leadership or a place of influence. And by power, I don't mean I'm controlling things. I mean, I'm able to influence in a way I want to, meaning, in this case, I want to influence for God, influence for good. And sometimes I freeze because I'm like, oh, wait, now I have power. Now what do I do with it? You know what I mean? And it's because in neither space am I relaxed, but I need to relax when I have no power or feel. And we understand Jesus is the Son of God, so he has power, but we're talking about he wasn't recognized as powerful. But you're exactly right. It's because Jesus was calm, not as a technique, but he was just centered on Christ so much, or centered on God so much. He was calm that as they came at him to try to shut him down, he became more and more powerful, which is greatly ironic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is. But it's like, okay, this shows up in my life when I'm with Heather, my wife, and all of a sudden I feel a little bit backed in the corner. I've made growth because I used to blow up. I've had big anger issues in my life, but I don't blow up. But I just go quiet, and I'm like, okay, it's good if I'm quiet listening, talking to God. It's not good if I'm quiet because I'm just saying, when will you shut up?
Yes.
I've never thought that, Heather. But it's that idea, that, wait, there's a third option here. There's this God option of relaxing in him, and if I need to exert myself in some way, he'll lead me there.
So it's that recognizing, like a lot of times we feel like if we're put in a position where we don't have any power or we can't influence people in the way that we think we should be able to influence, that like, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. Like I'm stuck. Like God, like what's going to happen because of this? That, my group is going to fail. The church is going to fail. And I think the message that I am kind of taking from this, and many times I've heard this and seen this, but that's a moment for me to say, okay, this is where the kingdom work gets done. So when I feel like I can't do anything, when I feel like I am just useless and I have nothing to offer, Jesus comes to me and says, yeah, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the humble, blessed are the meek. This is where I want to build my kingdom. And I think, man, that is so helpful for me. So thank you for saying that.
Well, yeah, absolutely. So what is perplexing to you?
When anybody comes to faith, they usually kind of have a process where they go to their preacher, they go to their pastor, and they begin to read specific people in their group, and they begin to take in and hear different sermons, now listen to different podcasts and read books, and just kind of really take in as much information as possible. At least that's kind of the anecdotal path of people who kind of just accepted Jesus. And one of the things that was so shocking for me is that when I kind of got outside of my own group, as I progressed in my faith and I became more mature, I began to read more and more people like Tim Mackey or John Mark Comer. And I read an entire book on the Sabbath by John Mark Comer. And it just opened up for me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like that, like, of course, like it makes sense. Like it's woven throughout not just reality, but the Bible. The Bible is constantly drawing on this theme of resting in who God is and practicing Sabbath. And so for me, the perplexing thing is why do we allow this? The idea of practicing a Sabbath is not, I mean, it's obviously the Jewish people have been doing it for thousands of years in the timeline of God. It's been since the beginning, since the seventh day of creation, that the Sabbath has been happening. And for me, it's something that is just come online in the past year. And so it's not even specifically related around the Sabbath, but that's happened so many different times for different practices and different ways of thinking or different ways of interacting with Scripture. And it makes me so sad that selfishly for me, that I lived a long time and this is a very basic kind of Christian practice that many different denominations and many different people have practiced the Sabbath in this specific way. And because of where I grew up, that was just something that was shut off from me. And it perplexes me that we allow that to happen. And I look at this passage, and I've heard people use this passage as a way to say, well, we don't have to Sabbath and we don't have to take our Sabbath. And the perplexing thing is, like, how many more things in my life am I going to discover because of my background, because of where I grew up, that I'm going to go, oh my goodness, why couldn't I have seen this before? Why did people not show me this? Why could I not see it? And there's trust in God, right? That God's going to provide that information when I need it. But still, I just go, when I experience that sort of life, and that mind's eye opens up, and I see the connection of what God is doing, it perplexes me and makes me sad that as people of Jesus, we're inevitable. We're doing it all the time. And yeah, that was a very long, rambling way to say that. It makes me sad that for a long time, I probably would have been the person to use this passage to justify not taking a Sabbath. And I'm not saying that that's everybody. That would have been me as a very young, immature person. But it makes me sad.
I totally relate to that. We have a friend, Dan Langdon. And Dan Langdon has said to me often, or I've heard him say it to other people, and I won't say just good, but basically being in a relationship with God is God always has more. And I mean, there's a lot of ways you can see this, but when he says, I'm giving you, I can provide for you this Ephesians 3, where he said, more than you ask or imagine. So he's inviting you to use your imagination. Now, for some church settings, that alone is scandalous. What? Imagination? That has no place here. But he's saying, I challenge you to imagine, and I will do more. And so this dynamic of walking with God and feeling like you have less and less. Oh, no, I can't do this and I can't do that, And I think that kind of drives, don't make me do a Sabbath too. I'm already giving up going to the club, and I can't cheat on my taxes. I mean, you're taking away all the fun stuff in life. Yeah. And I think it's, if our view is a walk with God is taking away more, like I have less and less and less, we need to understand that's not God's view. That's a humanly constructed view. And it's based on focusing on what God tells us not to do and not focusing on the why he tells us not to do it. Or focusing on what he tells us to do and not focusing on the why. Because he says, I'll give you abundant life, but if you feel like my life is narrowing, it's the opposite of abundant. It's the opposite of increasing. It's the opposite of beyond my imagination. It's not, I'm not saying condemn yourself. I'm saying that's a good signal. Exactly what you're saying, that I should feel some sadness that I have an opportunity to have more and I'm settling with less. And it's one thing for me to make a educated decision, say, I'm going to settle for less. But most of us, we've been tricked by the devil into thinking that what a walk with God is showing up at a place, doing worship in some way, giving our money there, and don't screw it up too bad. That is not the walk with God. That's not what even Jesus showed. There was a freedom he had to move in these settings. And of various things we've talked about, this is more, And so that's helped me, and I'm working on it, to think, okay, and we know this, if I eat better, if I have good exercise, if I have good rest, I will feel so much better. I will have a much more life in my life,
Yes.
And I think this is the thing. Will we trust God that he says, you made the case so well, will we trust God with, I built this for you? And why would you stop eating good food if you have access to it? And I'm saying you have access to rest. You're going to have to prioritize differently. But I think a key is understanding the why. If I'm just doing it because, well, God tells me to, I got to do it. No, the why is I'm reconnecting with him.
Yeah. If the why becomes, well, that's just what I'm supposed to do, then it becomes death. If the reason you go to church is because, well, that's just what I was told I had to do, then that's going to slowly kill you. If that's your reason for doing anything involving God, actually, I'm going to take that qualification off. If that's your reason for doing anything, going to work, playing, resting, having a family, falling in love, because that's just what you're supposed to do, or that's what I've been told I'm going to do, you are going to find death down that road. And man, I think that's so... I think where you and I, Jason, we live in 21st century America, and we are saturated in a culture that tells us to get more, to achieve more, to find more. In fact, this is a John Mark Comerism, if that's the proper way of saying it. He'll talk about how when we watch TV and there are commercials, I only see commercials during like football games because I don't have cable or anything like that. But the vast majority of commercials that you see are people resting. It's people at a party. It's people watching a game together, sharing a beer. The vast majority of times when people are depicted in commercials, it's because they're doing something restful. Usually it's not people working. If it's working, they're stressed in the commercial. And I think it's so ironic because we all know this to be the case. Like even the advertisers trying to sell us stuff, it's basically trying to get us to work more so we can buy their stuff, knows that we need rest. And they're trying to tell us that we need these specific things to rest. In fact, there's studies that have been done that show that basically for the average American worker, there's a certain point of hours where you become the law of diminishing returns happens, where if you work beyond 60, 70 hours, your productivity is going to take a nosedive. And this is where I talk about the working and the resting being written in the fabric of who we are. We're beginning to see that that's the case with science, that we need rest. In fact, you and I were, before this podcast started, we were talking about why is LeBron James going to play until he's 40? Why is Tom Brady throwing touchdown passes at 43? It's because they invest so much money into their bodies. I think LeBron James last year invested about $1.5 million in maintaining and caring for his body. And if we're not, obviously, if anybody is listening to this that has the capability to do that, please reach out because we want sponsors. No, but I think this is so, I just think this is so big and so important. This might be a little tangent that might cut out. I had read this book maybe a year and a half ago by John Mark Comer on the Sabbath, and I fell in love with it. I studied it a lot, and I was going to teach my youth group we're going to go through the book on Wednesday nights, and we're going to talk about it because, yeah, we've talked a lot about reading your Bible often, and yeah, we've talked about a lot about praying, but the Bible talks a lot more about practicing Sabbath than it talks about reading your Bible every morning. That's just the reality. And I had a meeting with the parents beforehand, and one of the parents were super concerned that we were talking about it. What they heard was that I was going to teach their kids, like some of the parents were concerned that I was going to teach the kids to be lazy, or that what God wanted for them was to not work, was to be, was just to be sleeping and resting and napping all day. And I think, man, that speaks so much, one, to the culture that we live in, that any hint of you need to take a break, you need to rest, is seen as dishonorable or as not right. Man, that view that I've held is completely toxic. And the thing that I draw on from that story was I had learned this stuff maybe 2 months before, and I had about a day or two where I was going in my head, I'm just going to these parents, how could you not understand how important this is? You're killing your kids. You're leading them into this terrible situation. And then I go, oh, I thought the same way that they did 2 months. I thought the same way that they think now 2 months ago. And so kind of going along with what the question my perplexing, it's a good reminder to go, okay, God has me where he has me for a reason, and he has them where he has them for a reason. And I can encourage them if I'm in a particular area, maybe God has revealed something to me, I can encourage them in that particular area. Like we talked about last week with Parker, am I worried about them? Am I worried about what they think about God or their relationship with God or their views on God because I want them to have the right picture or the right view, or is it because it makes me feel better about myself? Okay, so maybe just kind of a fun wrap up I think would be kind of cool. For anybody that hasn't practiced this, I would just say, like, maybe let's brainstorm some things that we might not think are Sabbath related or rest giving, and just give you permission. So it's like, hey, you're listening to this on Monday afternoon or whatever, and you're like, you know what, I want to try to practice Sabbath at some point this weekend. What's a life-giving, restful practice that you can do that's not just simply reading the Bible or whatever, even though that's good and a part of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we can even talk about what are restful ways to read the Bible.
Yes, that's
and
good too.
I would say in a general sense, there is something about consuming a lot of Bible content. So if you are a daily Bible reader trying to read the Bible in a year or whatever pacing, there is something about taking in a lot of data. But just realize that's one way. Mm. And it's primarily not restful unless you just read fast or can consume a lot of information quickly and not just consume, but really retain it and absorb it well. A practice like Lectio Divina, where you read a passage and then you rest. And you're asking yourself slightly different questions, and you can Google Lectio Divina. It's how I pronounce it, at least. But you read the same passage, usually a short passage, several times, and just let God teach you. So that can be restful. I would say, in general, the practice of gratitude, the practice of joy, and it can come down to what counts for blessings, which it's saying the same thing, but really sitting in it. The key is creating a space. No matter what you're doing, creating a space where you're inviting God just to rest in him. That's it. That's success. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to rest in God. But these techniques are, how do we fill the time? Because our mind wants to. Because in a perfect world, you could just be able to sit and thank God and think about God or just be at peace and clear your mind. But most of us, our minds are running so much, these techniques help. So if you think of a practice of joy, and think of, God, here's all the ways you brought joy to me this week. Here's all the things I'm grateful for. And obviously in November, a lot of people do thankfulness exercises. It doesn't have to be 100 things. It could be one thing. Sometimes I'll think, and this is, I don't know if this, I think I find it restful. The fact I'm talking I'm just picking into a microphone. How much do I have to be grateful for the microphone? The person that it thought about it first, the person that did the work, all the people, all the things that God has done. God, it just fills me with exuberance, this amazing thing that's a microphone, And so to me, those are things that jump out. I have more. What would you add?
So I'm just going to speak kind of from personal experience, some more practical things. Man, I think if you're going to practice Sabbath, eat good food. I think practicing Sabbath on a diet is going to be pretty rough for you. I think in my ideal Sabbath, there's a lot of pasta. There's a lot of dairy. There's very few people who are going to be able to practice keto on on the Sabbath.
Sorry
No,
to
but
our celiacs and our lactose intolerance. Anyway, go
no, Hannah's celiac and she eats plenty of pasta. But I think that's a very real thing. I think enjoying like good food. God gave the sense of taste for a reason, and being able to sit with a meal with people that you love. And it's a little harder during COVID time. But I think, one of the things that we can do on Sabbath is we can be around people that we love and that we enjoy. Last Friday, this wasn't a part of my quote unquote Sabbath plan, but we ended up going and having a meal at Hannah's parents' house with her brother and sister-in-law and our little niece. And it's really funny watching that experience morph over the 4 years that I've been married to Hannah. For the first 3 years, when we went over to her parents' house, her dad's a youth minister, for those who don't know. And so he always had some sort of game he always wanted to play. He'd always have some sort of fun little game, and they usually weren't too competitive, but they're really engaging and really fun. And so we would play games like constantly. We'd go over to their house and we'd just laugh and play and get joke mad at each other when somebody messed up the game. And it was just this joyous thing that we would do all the time. And when our niece was born about a year ago, that completely shifted and stopped. And so there's a Sabbath practice of joy in playing games together and laughing. And now we were over there this past Friday night, and so much of the joy and the resting that family finds is being able to look at this 1-year-old little girl and see, oh, we saw her a week ago and she's learned this new thing now, or her personality is developing in this way, and just rejoicing in who she is becoming and the health that God has given her and the development that she's taking. And so how we practice Sabbath is necessarily going to change based on any number of circumstances. So, man, I would say food, family, friends, laughter. There are things that God has put inside of you that you have deep passions for. And so I would plumb the depths of those, because for some people, their rest and their Sabbath might not be, maybe for you, the most resting thing is to be able to get on your, maybe not in the middle of winter, but get on your lawnmower and just mow your lawn and just be able to smell the grass and just take it all in and be able to rest in the goodness of God. Maybe that's your thing. For me, that sounds like hell, but it could be really restful for you. I would say, just as a general recommendation, anything that helps get us away from the achieve more, get more, do better mindset that we are being told to chase the other 6 days of the week. I think anything that can get us away from that perspective is ultimately going to be really helpful for us in the most important way, and that's drawing us closer to Jesus. And so, I would love, if any of you practice Sabbath, I would love to hear what your ideal day looks like. What are some ways that you practice the Sabbath? Because I'm genuinely fascinated in that.
I want to thank you for listening today. If you would like to get in touch with us, and we certainly would love that, you can reach us at our website, amazedandperplexed.com, or email us at amazedandperplexed@gmail.com. But we just want to keep encouraging you. Again, our goal is for you to explore this with God. And so whatever we say, we hope that stimulates, and just know we would appreciate the same from you. What is it that God has done in your life that brings you rest, that blesses you, because that may be the very thing that we're needing.